This is an NBC News special report. Reporting from Singapore, here's Lester Holt.
Good evening, everyone, from Singapore, where it is just before 9 in the morning local time, and the historic high-stakes summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong Un is just moments away. Here's a live picture right now from Singapore's Capella Hotel, where the two men are about to meet and shake hands for the first time. Both leaders who not long ago traded insults famously and threats left their hotels just a short time ago en route to this meeting. This is the first time a sitting U.S. president has ever met with a North Korean leader since the Kim dynasty took power 70 years ago. On the agenda, of course, North Korea's nuclear arsenal, and the Trump White House has been both raising hopes and lowering expectations about what will be accomplished here in the coming hours. Joining me right now here in Singapore, our Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrea Mitchell and Chief White House Correspondent Hallie Jackson. Hallie, let me start with you as we watch this. The president making news on a whole other matter. Here is Kim Jong Un now exiting his limousine, walking into the Capella Hotel. We last saw him last evening as he was doing some sightseeing here in Singapore. But as you can see now, walking into the Capella Hotel, the next time we see him, he will be coming out to greet President Trump, who we don't believe he has arrived yet. We're going to continue to watch this. Hallie, as I was leading to you a moment ago, President Trump just minutes ago was tweeting about some other news back in Washington. Can you fill us in?
Related to his top economic advisor, Lester, Larry Kudlow. Kudlow had joined the president at the G7 summit in Quebec, but the president tweeted that he has suffered a heart attack. He is back in Washington at the Walter Reed Medical Center. The president tweeting about this, as you mentioned, just moments away from that handshake with Kim Jong Un. Clearly, this is something that he and his staff are thinking about. Kudlow is in his early 70s. We last saw him just 48 hours ago. He went out on the Sunday shows talking about some of the tensions that erupted in Canada between President Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau over the new steel and aluminum tariffs that the U.S. has put on our allies. We don't have any word on Kudlow's condition at the moment, but we expect we should find out more. Clearly, the focus now of the president's top aides who are joining him, and Kudlow not on this trip, of course, perhaps a little split between what's happening at home and what's happening here. Yeah,
we're watching for President Trump now to arrive at the Capella Hotel. Andrea, as we look at that, the president also tweeted a bit earlier today about these meetings going on. And it's important to point out that before those two sit together, their representatives have been talking and working things out. How much of the real work is happening in those rooms?
That's where the real work has been happening. But of course, these are the deciders. A senior official just sending me a message that only these two men can make the big decisions as to whether Kim Jong Un will give up his weapons, what the president will offer in return. The fact that they're going to meet for 45 minutes at the beginning of this summit with only their translators present has made a lot of people nervous. It has raised some criticism. There will be notes, of course, from the translators, which become part of the presidential archive. The concern, as you see, Kim Jong Un, who had just arrived here at the hotel moments ago, the concern is, will one or the other agree to something unintentionally? Will Kim Jong Un make a claim that the president made a concession that he didn't really make without having the senior advisors including, of course, for the president's behalf, Secretary of State Pompeo, present for that? That is raising
clarity is obviously going to be key as we watch this. I would just inform that President Trump has already arrived. We didn't see him arrive, but he is in the hotel, and we will see them very soon step out here and make their first face-to-face greeting. We wait for that. I want to bring in Richard Engel right now. He is in Seoul. The man not at this table is President Moon of South Korea, but he has been certainly integral in trying to bring these two together. All of South Korea obviously watching this. What's the move right now in South Korea, Richard Engel?
People are watching this very closely. They realize the future of both North and South Korea are very much at stake today. They are watching history. Since World War II, the Korean peninsula has been divided. Since the Korean War, the North and South have been bitter enemies. And since then, since the 1950s, the North, under 3 generations of the Kim family, has become a rogue state, a rogue regime that has worked for 3 generations to develop nuclear weapons, while the South under the U.S. Security umbrella has become a prosperous, modern, capitalist economy. Now we are seeing that divide being, if not crossed, we are seeing the United States reaching over that divide, meeting in a very short time the President Trump with Kim Jong Un. People here are watching their past, they are watching their future, and they are seeing potentially a changing of the dynamics that has been in place on the Korean Peninsula since World War II.
Richard Engel, thank you very much. We see the reporters gathered there these are the pool photographers in front of that area where the two men will come out in just a few minutes and greet each other. Let me bring in Chuck Todd right now, our political director and moderator of Meet the Press. He's in Washington. Chuck, everything these days is through a political filter, and certainly there's been a lot of back and forth of what Democrats want to see come from this versus Republicans. But at the end of the day, you have to assume that everyone in Washington and America is rooting for success here.
You know, Lester, in these polarized times, frankly, in a period where I think a lot of Washington on both sides of the aisle are actually pretty disturbed by what happened in Canada with the G7, all of that in the background, and yet you do have some bipartisan sort of consensus, I would couple it, called fingers crossed, meaning there are people rooting for him. They're hoping he doesn't mess this up. They're nervous about everything, and Andrea mentioned that he's in there one-on-one. What is he going to give? And I think there's sort of what I would call is sort of cautiously optimistic that whatever comes out of this, they're going to have a robust, and when I'm referring to they here, Congress, I think they're going to try to have a robust role in this. Frankly, and in many cases, using the same rationale that Congress used with President Obama and the Iran nuclear deal. I think you're going to see Congress, particularly the Democrats, sort of use that same rationale to try to have a heavier hand in whatever comes out of this.
All right, Chuck, as you're speaking, we're seeing a couple limos come up. I think I saw American flags, so maybe this is, in fact, the arrival of President Trump. Yeah, you see the American flag, and that second limo then would likely be the president pulling up to the Capella Hotel. The latest guidance we're getting at 9:05 Eastern time, so that's in about 6 minutes, is when they are scheduled to come out and greet each other, see each other face to face. There is the presidential limousine, and we expect to see President Trump now emerge for this historic meeting. Keep in mind how quickly all this has come together. There's the president. All came together in March with that sudden announcement at the White House. Hallie, you were there.
And it took a lot of folks by surprise because, remember, it was announced and then it was pulled back and then it was announced again. So it was a little bit of whiplash back in Washington. And keep in mind that when we see these two men shake hands, the president has said he is ready to size up Kim Jong Un in a minute, by touch, by feel. He believes, and from what we've reported, he really does believe that he'll be able to assess Kim's credibility. He'll be able to assess how confident Kim is about being able to come to some kind of an agreement down the road to denuclearize right in the very beginning. There are real risks. When we speak to experts, they say, listen, you have these two leaders in a room with two translators and that's it. There's not a lot of verifiability about who says what. Will it turn into a he said situation?
Yeah, let me bring in Victor Cho if I can. He's an NBC News Korean affairs analyst. Victor, you and I spoke last week about all this and about this accelerated timeline. Just 3 months from the first time this was broached until we are sitting here in Singapore watching this now. What does that tell you about what they'll be able to accomplish and how this might go?
So, Lester, I think, the main thing for there's three things the president really needs to get out of this meeting. The first is that he wants the North Korean leader to commit to a full declaration of all of their weapons and weapons precursors. He wants them to also commit that this can then be verified. And then third, along a timeline, presumably 2020. Now, I don't know if they can get those sorts of things in writing in a statement because it would be very hard for the North Korean leader to do that. But maybe what he's trying to do is get that at least verbally from the North Korean leader. There's no record, there's no written record, but maybe he's trying to get that verbally from the North Korean leader. And if he can get that, then he might claim he's got a success. He's done something that past presidents were unable to do.
Andrea Mitchell, we talked about that rapid timeline, but think how Kim Jong Un has the image of a statesman. He is on the big stage right now. He is on the world stage. This is a man we have talked about as being a brutal dictator, creating nuclear weapons, killed relatives, and yet here he is. The body language is going to be very interesting, isn't it, for the president as he meets him?
Exactly. And Kim has completely changed his image. He's going around here in Singapore last night, the walkabout with his Singapore hosts.
Went right past me, crowds on the street.
Like a rock star. People taking pictures of him. He was, when he took over in 2011 after his father died, considered so callow, so young and inexperienced that there was concern that the uncle was actually running the country and that he might not survive. And he has consolidated his regime. He murdered the uncle, got rid of the stepbrother only a year ago in Kuala Lumpur with nerve gas, a banned substance. And he's actually consolidated his power domestically with the nuclear weapons. And now on the world stage achieving something no Kim leader, no regime leader has ever had. A meeting with the President of the United States on this world stage and viewed as, he's gone twice to China. He had never before traveled to China. He's going to be meeting with Putin. He's now accepted in the international community in a way that he never could have been if Donald Trump had not conferred the summit on him.
In many respects, in looking at what we are looking at right now, this live shot here of what's happening on Sentosa Island, Kim has already gotten what he wants to get. He has this photo op now with the leader of the free world, with the president of the United States. And as we watch these images and as we watched in the last 8 hours or so, Kim walk past you, Lester, he was cheered on, surrounded by his bodyguards. Remember, this is somebody who's been accused of the worst human rights abuses. That is not a topic that is expected to be at all front and center in these discussions today, to the chagrin of some human rights advocates who say this is a ruthless dictator who has murdered and starved his own people. Now, the goal for the United States is to work toward denuclearization, and that is the focus. It is possible human rights is something that will come up down the road, but that is certainly creating some consternation here. The choreography is meticulous. Every moment, every footstep, every handshake, much of this has been unscripted, like that walkabout from Kim. This next 10 minutes is not.
This is happening now live. There is Kim Jong Un walking through the portico. I couldn't make out what the president was saying. He's not mic'd. It was never clear whether there would be remarks here at this point.
In fact, there was some thought that Kim Jong Un did not want there to be remarks. And so seeing them together, which is so extraordinary, none of us who've covered North Korea, you've been there more recently than I, could ever have imagined this.
This is just a good beginning.
Another handshake. You saw President Trump put his hand on Kim Jong-un's back a couple of times, leading him. President Trump characteristically wanting to.
And then Kim jumping in and doing the same.
Doing the same, right?
You know, the age difference, just about twice as old Trump is than Kim. The president's birthday is Thursday.
Let's see if we can hear some more. Yeah, the president clearly relishing the role of at least taking the host position there, the way he was guiding him in.
You can see some of the reporters running up the stairs now, running inside. That's why the audio is difficult to hear. They had put reporters a ways back because the two men had not been expected to make remarks. They obviously had part of a conversation, and I expect we'll learn in the next couple of minutes what they said.
There will be many who will say this summit is a success if for no other reason what you just watched there over the last minute. The two men coming face to face, smiles, handshakes, some kind of small talk that maybe we can get some guidance a bit later from someone who was closer, who heard what they were saying. But it was a cordial, and I'll leave it to others to decide whether awkward, but certainly a cordial greeting.
But you didn't see a big grin from President Trump, and that you often do when he is meeting with world leaders, perhaps a thumbs up. It seems he is conscious, reading his body language, of that picture when the two of them face these cameras. That is the picture that will be on the front page of newspapers around the world.
And I'm looking at this same time, I'm hearing in my mind the threats, the nuclear button.
Sick puppy, little rocket
threats
man.
against Guam, all that.
And calling him little rocket man before the United Nations General Assembly last year. I'm thinking also, as Hallie just mentioned, the sober expression. Donald Trump did not want a picture of him grinning and shaking hands, just as when Bill Clinton went to North Korea for the first time as a former president to bring home 2 American journalists who had been imprisoned there. You had a remarkable picture of him sitting with Kim Jong Un, Kim's father, looking very sober.
There are a lot of do's and don'ts in these things, and I know the president typically doesn't like to be handled, but the protocol in these sorts of things is so critical, and appearances. I just want to let folks know that we're going to see some things, other things we won't see. We expected at this point they would go out of camera range, which they had. This is taped from a few moments ago. We will next see them in the room where the negotiation will take place, at least the bilateral, the 2 of them with only their interpreters. We'll get what we in the industry call a spray. The cameras will be let in. We may see some more small talk, some pictures of them posing, and then the cameras will leave, and they'll get them. Here it is. This is it.
They never stop. I feel really great. We're going to have a great discussion, and I think tremendous success. We'll be tremendously successful. And it's my honor, and we will have a terrific relationship, I have no doubt.
우리는 아주 굉장히 성공할 걸로 믿습니다. 그리고 아주 만나게 돼서 굉장히 영광스럽게 생각합니다. 아주 훌륭한 관계를 가지고 있고 아주 전혀 의심 없이 좋은 관계를 우리가 맺을 거라고 생각합니다.
여기까지 오는 길이 그리 쉬운 길은 아니에요.
Well, it was not easy to get here.
우리한테는 우리 발목을 잡는 그 과거가 있고 또 그런 국민과 관행들이 우리 때로는 우리 눈과 귀를 가리게
Sometimes used to blind us in our ear, but we ended up arriving to this location.
On our limbs, and the old prejudices and practices worked as obstacles on our way forward, but we overcame all of them, and we are here today.
That's true.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
This way. Thank you.
All right, guys, let's go.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All taking in this moment. You may have seen these sorts of things before at the White House. These are pool reporters, designated reporters who it is a pool that's swapped around to different network duties and different news agencies to follow the president wherever he goes. So you heard some questions being asked to the 2 men. The press now being ushered out. But what we heard the president talk about really great. I couldn't hear everything he said, but he talked about that he expects it to be a tremendous success. I couldn't hear what Kim Jong Un
seemed to say that we have overcome obstacles to get here, but here we are. And the president agreed with that at that point. It was interesting. He also said we will have a tremendous success and have a terrific relationship. This comes, remember, after days of the president and his team trying to lower expectations a little bit, trying to manage the expectations game, knowing that they're not going to walk out of here with a deal to denuclearize. That's not going to happen with the snap of the fingers. You heard reporters, when they go in these rooms, when we go into these rooms with the president back at the White House, you yell questions at the president, hoping he'll answer them. And you heard him say to Kim, boy, they never stop, don't they? Is an allusion to the idea that these reporters are trying to get more information out, as the 2 of them, as you can see them talking just moments ago here. We understand as well from the reporters who are there that when the 2 of them shook hands, Kim Jong Un said something like, "It's nice to meet you, Mr. President." No major news, but the pleasantries, the formalities that you might expect when 2 strangers, frankly, meet for the first time.
I'd like to get Victor Chaw in here. Victor, anything you've noticed in the body language, anything that's worth pointing out here?
So I guess there are two things, Lester. I'd agree with what Hallie said. When they first came together, it was very clear, and the interpreters were far away from the two leaders. It's very clear that Kim Jong Un did say something in English, and apparently he does speak some English. He spoke some English with Mike Pompeo when Mike Pompeo went to visit North Korea twice. The second thing is that there's a lot of smiling by the North Korean leader. I think part of that is he's happy to be there, but the other part of it is he's very much trying to model his grandfather, the first leader of North Korea, who was a very extroverted individual, was always smiling, always very hearty, unlike his father, who was kind of a recluse and didn't speak much publicly. Kim Jong Un is trying to project that sort of very grandiose personality, this leader of North Korea, like the first leader of North Korea, even though he's only 34 years old, half the age, less than half the age of President Trump.
Yeah, he is the supreme leader there. They call him the dear leader, and I'm trying to imagine he has a staff. They've been negotiating, but when you have that kind of role, when you're a dictator, do you have handlers? Do you have the equivalent of President Trump's aides saying, say this, don't say that?
Yes, I do think he got briefed very well before the meeting, and it's not clear that they can say to the North Korean leader, you know, Supreme Leader, please don't do this. Not very likely, because I don't think you can do that in North Korea. You can get your head chopped off or your hand chopped off. But then again, the North Korean leader has been preparing for this meeting for a long time. When he met with the South Korean National Security Advisor, it was very clear based on their 4-hour dinner that they had very deep conversations, and the North Korean leader, despite alcohol and everything else, was never off point. He was right on script. At least that's what we're hearing from sources and from Korean press. So in that sense, this individual is quite well prepared, compared to President Trump, who said he's going to go in and he's going to wing it, he's going to do it based on feel.
You know, the other thing about Kim Jong Un is when he met with Moon at the DMZ, he's the one who took President Moon, the South Korean leader, by the hand and stepped across and then stepped back. He made that photo opportunity. He's quite the showman for a young man who has been cloistered in the hermit kingdom until very recently, in recent months, and now emerging on the world stage. But President Trump, very much the elder statesman, trying to, with the hand gesture and the touching him on the arm, trying to be the host more than Kim Jong Un, and then the younger man also touching President Trump on the arm. The body language is very, very friendly. They both know that they are performing.
And just as important as the body language is what these two men are saying to each other right now as they're in this room with these translators, and what kind of conversation that is. Because we heard Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, when he spoke with us just a few hours ago, we were in the room talking about the goals for this. Secretary Pompeo talked about the idea that the U.S. is prepared to make different and unique security assurances to North Korea, essentially to give them some confidence that if they do give up their nuclear weapons, they're not going to be left out in the cold, out in the dark. So will the president bring that up in this conversation? Will he talk about something else he's talked about publicly, which is perhaps coming up with a formal end to the Korean War that, of course, decades ago the fighting ended, but it's never formally been concluded? How much does that factor into this conversation? Do they work some of these details out before they go into that bilateral meeting and then the working lunch that is set to happen in just a couple of hours?
Typically, those things are worked out
already in advance.
But it's hard to, typical is not a word we associate.
Well, Secretary Pompeo indicated that they had made so much progress that the president, in fact, was planning to leave tonight after these meetings and after the news conference that he plans to hold, because they do not think they need an extra meeting.
I've been glancing to my right from time to time. About 100 feet from us is members of a South Korean network. And you have to think that South Korea has stood still right now watching this moment, because certainly a lot of their future rides on what happens there. I want to go to Richard Engel, who is in Seoul. I don't know what your vantage point there is, Richard, but do you get a sense that that time has stood still in South Korea at this moment?
Well, everyone has been watching this very closely. I wouldn't say that the nation has stood still, but the people here very much feel that their future is being dictated in real time. Where I am in Seoul, this is a city of 25 million people. We are just 35 miles from the North Korean border. We are 35 miles from that country's 1.2 million man army, its entire war machine, the war machine which for decades is pointed at this city. There has always been an understanding that if the United States and North Korea get into some sort of shooting war, Seoul gets destroyed and potentially hundreds of thousands of people right here get killed. So 6 months ago, when there was the little rocket man, when Kim Jong Un was firing missiles and blowing up nuclear weapons, there was real tension here. There was real fear. People were protesting against President Trump, calling him a warmonger. Now people are watching this summit, these smiles, these handshakes, the North Korean leader looking like a normal politician, someone who sits down in front of reporters, takes questions thrown at him from a press pool, gives some sort of very brief answer, but that is not the kind of North Korean leadership that they have seen here in Seoul, South Korea. So yes, they are breathing a degree of a sigh of relief compared to where things were just a few months ago. But that said, I will say there is also a healthy degree of skepticism. People here think maybe this is all show. Maybe President Trump is trying to use this in order to distract the agenda, to try and divert attention from domestic problems. Perhaps North Korea is just using this in order to gain international legitimacy and has no intention of actually giving up its nuclear weapons. But for now, compared to where we were 6 months ago, certainly a sigh of relief.
Yeah, that's Richard Engel in Seoul. The pictures you're looking at were taken moments ago. The two leaders now are out at the camera site. The camera's taken out of the room. They are in their first, what they call bilateral session, the two of them with their respective interpreters now. So we won't see them again for a little bit. I want to bring in now NBC News Chief International Security and Diplomacy Analyst, Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, let's not forget there are 28,000 American troops in South Korea. If it's not on the table explicitly today, is that ultimately a sticking point between these two?
Yeah, I think it is, Lester. Let's back up a little bit. It's not just the 28,000 troops. We have many naval ships. We have aircraft carriers operating in the area. We have strategic bombers flying from Guam and nearby. We have alliance systems with Japan and other allies in the region. So it's a big military complex that surrounds this Korean peninsula. And I think that if you're Kim Jong Un and you're trying to work your way, let's give him the benefit of the doubt and think that perhaps he actually wants to eventually give up these weapons, he's got to work his way mentally toward a feeling that there's no capability to take his regime out. To get there, I think the president at some point is going to have to consider reductions in military troop levels. I think that's going to be a very tough swallow for the United States and for the South Koreans. You know, there's another party here that we haven't really mentioned that are also watching this show with great curiosity and a great sense of anticipation, Lester, and that's China. What's happening in Beijing right now is that they really want this divided peninsula. They are frankly not enthusiastic about something that shows Kim Jong Un becoming too close, moving too far toward the south. So they are playing a delicate game as well here to try and maintain control of events on the peninsula. Bottom line, Richard Engel is exactly right. You know, Woody Allen said 90% of life is showing up. The two leaders have shown up. Compared to where we were 6 months ago, this is an improvement.
Yeah, and let's not forget, to your point about China, even President Trump had noted when he originally canceled this meeting that he thought that China had gotten into Kim Jong Un's ear to some extent. So they are a player, as well as Japan. Let's not forget that Japan is in range of the medium-range missiles from North Korea. And Prime Minister Abe recently met with the president, expressing his concerns that, you know, while they may not have an official seat at this table, they are an important part of this conversation. I want to bring in now our NBC News diplomatic analyst, Chris Hill, former U.S. ambassador to South Korea. He joins us from New York. I'm fixated a little bit with this body language thing. What have you seen from not only their gestures, but what we heard in those brief snippets that stands out to you, Ambassador?
Well, I'm not sure there's a lot that can be said, except that clearly President Trump is just all in. I mean, he's not going to avoid smiling or otherwise try to be cold the way people have done so in the past. I think he's basically all in. I mean, this is a huge task. I mean, inevitably, I think Kim Jong Un will talk about U.S. forces in South Korea, and I would hope that the president would say, look, those forces are there for defensive purposes. As long as you don't attack South Korea, you have absolutely nothing to be concerned about from our 28,000 troops there. And I think the China situation is very complex. I just got back from China Sunday night, and to hear the Chinese about this, they're kind of happy, but they're kind of nervous, and they're not really sure they like what's going on. So I hope there's a pivot in the next day or two so that we start getting China more involved, because they're going to have to be part of the solution if really anything comes out of this.
Yeah, let me bring Victor Cha back in. Victor, anything that gets done here, even if it's just some kind of a framework, things move slow in diplomacy typically. What kind of timeline are we looking at to get the world to a point where North Korea is no longer considered a threat and the U.S. will feel comfortable untying those sanctions?
Yeah, so I think a real priority for the Trump administration would be to try to get North Korea to agree to denuclearization, a denuclearization process broadly conceived, but within a specific timeline, and that is within the end of President Trump's first term in office. Now, the North Koreans have never agreed to timelines in the past, and they may have tried to get that in the joint statement, which I don't think the North Koreans would agree to. So it could be in this bilateral meeting, in this one-on-one, the president is trying to get the North Korean leader to agree to something, at least verbally, that he would aim for a denuclearization process within this very compressed time frame. Secretary Pompeo has referred a number of times in his press briefings to a compressed time frame for denuclearization. So that seems very high on the list for the president, both for verification reasons in terms of denuclearization, but obviously also for political reasons. But it's very difficult for the North Koreans to agree to something like that in writing.
Chuck, Todd, we don't know what the bar to success is, but assuming the president can come out of here with something, how does he return back to Washington? What changes for him potentially?
Look, I think there's a pretty high bar here for success. The president's getting a reputation for, he makes a big sort of announcement or pronouncement, and then what we think it is gets walked back. And so, there's so many components to whatever potential rhetorical deal that gets set up here. I mean, I think the president has at least lowered the bar. I think the assumption out of Washington is simply they're going to agree to meet again, right? They'll agree to some framework to continue conversation. But that's about it. And frankly, I think that's what most of Washington hopes is what comes out of this. It's essentially an agreement to keep talking. The big fear is that if he agrees to something rhetorically, how to figure that out. And that, in some ways, just buying more time to keep talking is the best outcome.
The president has already alluded to the possibility of another summit, of another history-making summit down the road at the White House in Washington. He talked about that in the Rose Garden just recently, the idea that perhaps if this goes well, he would invite Kim to the United States, which would be yet another moment that the world will watch, as many in the region are looking at those flags, Lester, the American flags and the North Korean flags, side by side, on equal footing, on an equal stage. That is what Kim has wanted. That is what he now has. No matter how the next 3 hours goes, there's that image that will play again and again back in North Korea. North Koreans, by the way, state media only reported that Kim Jong Un had traveled to Singapore to meet with President Trump in the last 24 hours. There was not a lot of the tee up and the anticipation that you saw here in the U.S. there.
But that in itself was really unusual. Normally, North Korean media don't report until he is back in the country. They report after the fact, and this is the first time in real time, at least, that he is in Singapore for this meeting, which conferred another level of status to this visit, the importance. And it was their most prominent newscaster, the woman who has in the past been announcing nuclear tests.
Andrea, I want to ask you, the president often compares himself to his predecessors and to political enemies, and he's talked about this should have been handled by his predecessors, and it wasn't, and he's taking it upon himself to fix it. Talk a moment about his predecessors. Bill Clinton tried and failed here. Barack Obama certainly didn't get this far. What has he done differently? Is it the man? Is it the timing? Put this in perspective for us.
I think we have to wait to really understand what was motivating Kim Jong Un to make this turn. Remember, on January 2nd, these two men were threatening each other with the size of their nuclear buttons. That's only 6 months ago. And the fact is, Bill Clinton tried and failed with negotiations that went off the rails. First of all, Kim Jong Un's grandfather died in that period. And then his father got out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, kicked inspectors out. So there was a real deadlock there. Jimmy Carter went and tried to negotiate with Kim Jong-il, the father, much to the distress of the White House, because he didn't really have a mandate to do this negotiation, but he wanted a peace agreement. He wanted some sort of breakthrough. So Bill Clinton never succeeded until 2000, when there were signals to the former Defense Secretary, Bill Perry, and at that point, there was a meeting in Washington, a high-level meeting, the only previous high-level meeting in the White House, in the Oval Office, and Bill Clinton then authorized Madeleine Albright to go. I went on that trip in October of 2000, and it didn't go completely smoothly. Our colleague Wendy Sherman was one of the officials on that trip, but they really believed that the father was interested in diplomatic relations. And Bill Clinton told me after he left office that if not for the end of their tenure, the fact that George Bush was elected and not Al Gore, they would have normalized relations that spring, and he would have gone to Pyongyang.
And Hallie, you cover him every day in the White House. How, there's this sense of wanting to compare himself to his predecessors.
You could almost call it the anti-Obama doctrine. What we've seen again and again from day one of this administration is the president trying to do things differently than the Democrat, frankly, his political opponent who came before him. Based on our reporting, what's driving a lot of this from the president's perspective is a desire to achieve something that will define his legacy. And if that is denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, he will ride that for the rest of his life. That'll be the thing that he is known for, and he is aware of that. There's also, and not to put my Chuck Todd hat on, but there's the political component to this as well. When the president talks about North Korea, when he makes these overtures, when he brings back these former detainees, these American citizens from North Korea, and they stand on the tarmac at Joint Base Andrews and reunite with their families, people like that.
All right. Well, so this unprecedented summit is underway. We will be here through the night covering it all. We'll come back on the air just as soon as events warrant, including live coverage of President Trump's news conference. That is expected to happen about 4 a.m. Eastern Time, Tuesday morning. For now, I'm Lester Holt, NBC News, reporting from the summit in Singapore.